They say a mother's love is the strongest thing in the world, but I learned the hard way that sometimes a mother's fear can be just as powerful and just as dangerous. The first time I felt the world tilt beneath my feet, I was standing in my own kitchen, hands trembling over a chipped mug of ginger tea. The morning sun was barely up, painting the linoleum floor in pale gold, but my heart was already racing. I could hear my mother-in-law's voice in the next room, low and urgent, whispering to my husband. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the chill in the air, the way you feel a storm coming before the first drop falls. I was 6 months pregnant, and I should have been glowing. Instead, I felt like I was shrinking day by day, under the weight of something I couldn't name. Before all this, my life was simple. Not perfect, but simple. My name is Leela, and I married into the Chen family 3 years ago. My husband, Daniel, is the kind of man who laughs with his whole body, shoulders shaking, eyes crinkling, the sound filling up a room. We met at a bookstore, both reaching for the same battered copy of A To Kill a Mockingbird. He let me have it, and I let him have my number. We lived in a small sunlit apartment above his parents' bakery. Every morning, the smell of sweet bread and sesame filled the stairwell. I worked as a nurse at the local clinic, and Daniel managed the bakery with his mother, Mrs. Chen. She was a woman of few words, but her hands were always busy, kneading dough, folding dumplings, straightening Daniel's collar before he left for work. Our life was a quiet rhythm, early mornings, shared meals, laughter over mismatched bowls of rice. When I found out I was pregnant, Daniel cried. He held me so tight I could feel his heartbeat through his shirt. Mrs. Chen said nothing, just pressed a warm hand to my cheek and nodded. I thought it was her way of showing love. But as my belly grew, so did the distance between us. Mrs. Chen started coming upstairs more often, bringing herbal teas and old wives' tales. She'd watch me with sharp eyes, correcting the way I sat, the way I ate, even the way I breathed. You must not cross your legs, she'd say. Her voice clipped. It's bad for the baby, or no cold drinks. It will make the child weak. At first I tried to see it as care. I told myself she was just worried, that this was her way of helping. But sometimes late at night, I'd catch her watching me with a look I couldn't quite read. Something between fear and suspicion. Daniel noticed too. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, whisper. She means well, Lila. She just wants the best for us. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love, even when it's sharp-edged, is still love. Just started small. A cup of tea left on my nightstand, bitter and dark, with a smell I didn't recognize. Drink this. Mrs. Chen said, her eyes not meeting mine. It's good for the baby. I took a sip out of politeness, but the taste lingered on my tongue, metallic and wrong. The next morning I woke up dizzy, my stomach churning. I blamed it on the pregnancy, on hormones and sleepless nights. But the feeling didn't go away. Every time Mrs. Chen brought me something, soup, tea, even a bowl of fruit, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. One afternoon, I found her in our bedroom folding my laundry. She looked up, startled, and dropped a pair of my socks. And just helping, she said too quickly. I tried to smile, but my hands were shaking. I started to notice other things, too. My prenatal vitamins went missing, only to reappear days later in the wrong drawer. My favourite snacks, salted crackers, dried mango, disappeared from the pantry. When I asked Daniel, he shrugged. Maybe you ate them and forgot, but I knew I hadn't. The worst was the way Mrs. Chen watched me, her eyes following every move. If I laughed too loud, she frowned. If I cried, she turned away. I felt like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around her mood. One night, I woke to the sound of whispering in the hallway. I pressed my ear to the door and heard Mrs. Chen's voice, low and urgent. She's not strong enough, Daniel. She doesn't know our ways. This child, her words faded as Daniel hushed her, but the fear in her voice stayed with me. I tried to talk to Daniel about it, but he just pulled me close and kissed my forehead. You're imagining things, he said, his voice gentle. She's just old-fashioned. Don't let it get to you. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was being watched, tested, judged, that my mother-in-law was waiting for me to fail. I started keeping a small notebook in my bedside drawer, jotting down every odd thing I noticed, the missing vitamins, the bitter teas. The way Mrs. Chen would hover in the doorway when I was on the phone with my mother, listening but pretending to dust the shelves. I wrote it all down, hoping that if I saw it on paper, it would make sense. But all it did was make me feel more alone. At work, I found myself glancing at the clock, dreading the walk home. My colleagues noticed the change in me. "You look tired, Leila," Nurse Patel said one afternoon, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right at home?" I wanted to tell her everything, to spill out my fears and suspicions, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain that I was afraid of my own mother-in-law, that I felt like a stranger in my own life? Instead, I smiled and said, "It's just pregnancy stuff. You know how it is." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me a little longer than usual. At home, the tension grew thicker. Mrs. Chen started insisting on preparing all my meals. "You need proper nutrition," she'd say, taking the spatula from my hand. "Let me do it." She'd serve me bowls of congee, steamed fish, and strange herbal broths. I tried to eat, but the food tasted off, too salty, too bitter, too. Something. I started losing weight, my cheeks growing hollow, my skin pale. Daniel noticed, but he was caught in the middle. "She's just trying to help," he'd say, rubbing my back as I lay curled on the couch. "I let her take care of you. It's her way." But I could see the worry in his eyes, the way he glanced at me when he thought I wasn't looking. One evening, after another silent dinner, I found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, pouring something from a small brown bottle into my tea. She froze when she saw me, her hand trembling. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the only sound the ticking of the old wall clock. "What is that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She set the bottle down, her face unreadable. "It's just herbs. For your health." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that she meant well, but something in her eyes made my stomach twist. That night, I poured the tea down the sink when no one was looking. The real breaking point came on a rainy Thursday. I was home alone, the bakery closed for the afternoon. I decided to do some cleaning, hoping the movement would shake off the heaviness that had settled in my chest. As I dusted the shelves in the living room, I noticed a small, leather-bound notebook tucked behind a stack of cookbooks. It wasn't mine, and it didn't look like Daniel's. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, expecting to find old recipes or maybe a list of errands. Instead, I found pages and pages of notes, written in Mrs. Chen's neat, slanted handwriting. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. Lists of foods, dates, strange symbols. But as I flipped through, my heart began to pound. There were entries about me, about my habits, my moods, what I ate and when. Notes about my doctor's appointments, the vitamins I took, even the times I woke up in the night. One entry, dated 2 weeks ago, read, "Lila refuses the tea. Must try a different blend. She is stubborn." Daniel must not know. My hands shook as I read on. There were lists of herbs. Some I recognized from the teas she'd given me. Others I didn't. I pulled out my phone and started searching the names. Some were harmless, but others, my breath caught in my throat, were not recommended for pregnancy. Some could even cause complications. I felt cold all over. My mind raced back to the dizzy spells, the nausea, the weight loss, the way Mrs. Chen watched me, always so careful, so controlling. I realized with a sickening clarity that this wasn't just overprotectiveness. This was sabotage. I sat on the floor, the notebook open in my lap, tears streaming down my face. I felt betrayed, violated, terrified. How could she do this to me, to her own grandchild? When Daniel came home that night, I showed him the notebook. He read in silence, his face growing paler with every page. When he finally looked up, his eyes were full of disbelief and pain. She wouldn't," he whispered, but his voice was hollow. "She did," I said, my voice shaking. "She's been trying to control everything. She's been giving me things that could hurt the baby." He sat down hard on the couch, his head in his hands. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The rain tapped against the window, steady and relentless. Finally, Daniel stood up. "We have to talk to her," he said, his voice trembling. "We have to make this stop," I nodded, wiping my tears. I was scared, but I knew he was right. We couldn't pretend anymore. We had to face the truth, no matter how painful. That night, the house felt colder than ever. Daniel and I sat together in the living room, the notebook between us like a loaded gun. I could hear Mrs. Chen moving around in the kitchen, the soft clatter of dishes, the hiss of the kettle. My heart thudded in my chest. every beat echoing the fear and anger swirling inside me. Daniel squeezed my hand. "I'll talk to her first," he said quietly, "but I want you there. She needs to see what she's done." I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't know what I would say, or if I could say anything at all. I just knew I needed to hear her admit it. I needed to understand why. When Mrs. Chen came in wiping her hands on a dish towel, she paused at the sight of us. Her eyes flicked to the notebook on the table, then back to our faces. For a moment, she looked almost tired, older than I'd ever seen her. "You sit down, Ma," Daniel said, his voice gentle but firm. She hesitated, then lowered herself into the armchair across from us. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Daniel opened the notebook, flipping to one of the pages. "We found this," he said. "Alila found it. We read it." Mrs. Chen's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't look at me. "It's just notes," she said quietly. "For your health, for the baby." I felt my anger flare. "Some of these herbs aren't safe for pregnancy. You know that. You're not just making notes, you're interfering. You're hurting me. You're hurting your grandchild." She finally looked at me, her eyes shining with something I couldn't name. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what it's like to lose a child." The words hit me like a slap. I stared at her, stunned. Mrs. Chen's hands twisted in her lap. "Before Daniel, I lost 2 babies. Both times I did everything right. I did everything right. I followed all the rules, all the traditions. But it didn't matter. They were gone before I could even hold them." Her voice broke and she looked away, blinking back tears. "When you got pregnant, I was so afraid. I thought if I could just control everything, if I could just make you do things the right way, maybe nothing bad would happen." Daniel reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I didn't want to hurt you, Leela. I was scared. I thought I was helping. I wanted to feel compassion. I wanted to understand, but all I could feel was the ache in my chest, the fear for my baby, the betrayal. "You should have trusted me," I whispered. "You should have trusted us." Mrs. Chen covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Daniel sat beside her, silent, his face pale and drawn. I stood up, my legs unsteady. "I need some air," I said, and walked out into the hallway, the notebook clutched to my chest. I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain. My mind raced with questions. Could I ever trust her again? Could I stay in this house, knowing what she'd done? What if something had happened to the baby? In the morning, I called my doctor and told her everything. She listened quietly, then told me to come in for a checkup. "Bring anything you've been given," she said. "We'll run some tests, just to be safe." Daniel drove me to the clinic, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick with worry and regret. At the clinic, the doctor examined me, took blood samples, and asked gentle questions. She reassured me that the baby's heartbeat was strong, that I was healthy, but she wanted to keep an eye on things. "You did the right thing, Lala," she said softly. "You have to protect yourself and your child." When we got home, I packed a small bag. "I need to stay with my mother for a while," I told Daniel. "I need space. I need to feel safe." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'll talk to her. I'll make sure she understands." I hugged him, feeling the weight of everything we'd lost. "I love you," I whispered, "but I can't be here right now." He helped me carry my bag downstairs. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She didn't say a word as I walked past her, but I saw the tears in her eyes. At my mother's house, I finally let myself cry. I cried for the baby, for Daniel, for the family I thought I had. My mother held me, rocking me like a child, whispering that I was strong, that I would get through this. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. The days at my mother's house passed in a gentle blur. She made me warm soup and tucked me in with extra blankets, fussing over me in the way only mothers can. I felt safe, but I also felt hollow, as if a part of me had been left behind in that apartment above the bakery. Daniel called every night. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just listened to each other breathe. He told me he'd confronted his mother again, that he'd shown her the doctor's notes and the list of unsafe herbs. "Herbsy, she's devastated, Lila," he said quietly. "She keeps saying she didn't know, that she never meant to hurt you. She's not eating. She barely leaves her room." I wanted to feel sorry for her, but the fear was still too fresh. I needed time. I needed to know that I could protect my child, even if it meant keeping my distance from the woman who had tried in her own twisted way to protect us all. He brought a bag of fresh bread from the bakery, the crust still warm, the smell filling my mother's kitchen. He looked tired, older somehow, but when he saw me, his eyes softened. "I miss you," he said, sitting across from me at the table. "The house is so quiet without you." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I miss you too, but I can't come back." "Not yet," he nodded, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "I understand. I want you to know I'm on your side. Whatever you need, I'll do it." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the kitchen clock. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Ma wants to apologize. She wants to see you, but only if you're ready." I shook my head. "Not yet. I need to focus on the baby, on myself." He nodded again, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'll wait. We'll wait." Word spread quickly in our small community. The bakery regulars noticed my absence, and soon the whispers began. Some people said I was sick, others that I'd gone to visit family. But a few Chen best guessed the truth. One morning my mother came into my room, her face troubled. "Mrs. Wong from the market stopped me today," she said. She asked if everything was all right. She said Mrs. Chen hasn't been herself. She's been closing the bakery early, barely speaking to anyone. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. I had to protect my child. That was all that mattered. A week later, Daniel called. "Amar wants to talk to you. She's ready to tell the truth, to everyone." I hesitated, but something in his voice made me agree. I said, "But I want it to be at the bakery, in front of the family." The next day, I walked into the bakery for the first time in weeks. The smell of fresh bread and sweet buns hit me like a wave, bringing back memories of happier times. Daniel was waiting for me, his hand warm and steady in mine. Mrs. Chen stood behind the counter, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. The rest of the family was there too, Daniel's father, his sister, even a few close friends. The room was silent as I walked in, every eye on me. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her hands trembling. She bowed her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have something to say." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "I made a terrible mistake. I let my fear control me. I tried to force Leela to follow my ways, to do things the way I thought was right. I gave her things I shouldn't have. I hurt her, and I put my grandchild at risk. I'm so sorry." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over us like a heavy blanket. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I held them back. Daniel's father stepped forward, his face stern. "You should have trusted Leela. She's family. We all want what's best for the baby." Mrs. Chen nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. I was wrong. There was no anger in the room, only sadness. Sadness for what had been lost, for the trust that had been broken. Afterward, people came up to me, offering hugs and quiet words of support. Some shook their heads, muttering about old traditions and the dangers of fear. Others simply held my hand, their eyes full of understanding. For the first time, I felt seen. I felt heard. I wasn't alone anymore. The resolution healing beginning. That night, Daniel and I sat together in our old apartment, the city lights twinkling outside the window. The bakery was quiet below us, the smell of bread lingering in the air. "I'm proud of you," Daniel said, his voice soft. "You stood up for yourself." "For our family." I leaned against him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. "I just want to move forward. I want our child to grow up in a home filled with love, not fear." He kissed the top of my head. "We'll make it happen. Together." The days that followed were slow, gentle, and full of small, careful steps. I stayed at my mother's house a little longer, letting the quiet heal me. My mother would sit with me in the evenings, her hands busy with knitting, her presence a steady comfort. Sometimes we talked about the baby, about names and tiny socks and the way life can turn on a single moment. Sometimes we just sat in silence, letting the past settle between us like dust. Daniel visited every day. He brought me updates from the bakery, stories about the regulars, and little gifts. A fresh peach, a note folded into a paper crane, a photo of the sunrise from our old window. He never pushed me to come home, never rushed my healing. He just loved me, quietly and completely, the way he always had. Mrs. Chen wrote me a letter. It arrived one morning, slipped under my mother's door. The envelope was thin, the handwriting careful and neat. I sat on the edge of my bed, the morning light spilling across the quilt, and read her words. Leela, I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you. I let my fear become bigger than my love. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only protecting myself from old ghosts. I see now that I must let go and trust you to care for my grandchild in your own way. I hope one day you can forgive me. I will wait as long as it takes. With love, Ma, I read the letter twice, then pressed it to my heart. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her, but I knew I wanted to try. For Daniel, for our child, for myself. A week before my due date, I went home. The apartment was just as I remembered, sunlight on the floor, the faint smell of flour and sugar drifting up from the bakery. Daniel met me at the door, his eyes shining with relief and hope. Mrs. Chen was there too. She stood in the kitchen, her hands folded, her face uncertain. For a moment we just looked at each other, the silence thick with everything we hadn't said. Then she stepped forward, her voice trembling. May I help you with the baby's room? I nodded, my throat tight. I'd like that. We worked together in quiet harmony, folding tiny clothes, hanging soft curtains, arranging stuffed animals on the shelf. Mrs. Chen moved slowly, careful not to overstep, always asking before she touched anything. I could see the effort it took, the way she bit her lip and glanced at me for approval. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. That night, as I lay in bed, Daniel curled round me. I felt the baby kick, strong and sure. I pressed Daniel's hand to my belly and we both laughed, the sound light and free. I think we're going to be okay, I whispered. He kissed my cheek. We already are. The bakery became a place of quiet healing too. Mrs. Chen returned to work, her movements slower, her voice softer. She apologized to the staff, to the family, to the regulars who had noticed her absence. Some forgave her easily, others took time, but she faced them all, her head held high, her words honest and humble. People in the community began to talk, not in whispers, but in open, honest conversation, about fear, about tradition, about the ways we hurt each other without meaning to. Some mothers shared their own stories of loss and worry, of trying too hard to protect the ones they loved. Others spoke of forgiveness, of learning to let go. I found myself invited to join these conversations, to share my story. At first I was hesitant, my voice shaky and uncertain. But as I spoke, I saw the understanding in people's eyes, the way they nodded and reached for my hand. I realized I wasn't alone. None of us were. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy, squalling little girl with Daniel's eyes and my stubborn chin, the whole family gathered in the hospital room. My mother held her first, tears streaming down her face. Daniel's father beamed with pride, snapping photos and sending them to every relative he could think of. Mrs. Chen stood at the foot of the bed, her hands clasped, her eyes shining with hope and fear and fear. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman who had hurt me, but the woman who had been hurt herself, the woman who had lost and loved and tried, however imperfectly, to protect her family. I held out my hand. She took it, her grip trembling. Would you like to hold her? I asked. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She cradled my daughter in her arms, whispering soft words in Mandarin, her voice full of love and apology. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The anger and fear faded, replaced by something softer, something like forgiveness. We named our daughter May after Daniel's grandmother. It means a beautiful, and she was every inch of her, from her tiny fingers to her fierce, hungry cry. Life didn't go back to the way it was before. It became something new, something stronger and more honest. We learned to talk, to listen, to forgive. We learned that love isn't always gentle, but it can heal if you let it.